Don't stop, stop, stop believing. Ba, ba, ba. Hello, my loves. Welcome back to Sin and Tonic. Chin, chin, chin. Today's story is another lady. Sin and Tonic! Today's story is Katherine Knight. She was the first Australian woman to be sentenced to imprisonment without the possibility of parole. So a little backstory on Katherine Knight. You guessed it, her father was an alcoholic. Running theme in most of the stories that I look into is that the parent or the father or mother of the, what are they called? It's not the victim, it's the perpetrator, is an alcoholic and they have a rough childhood. Doesn't excuse murder or any misbehaviour, but it's very interesting, isn't it? I think it's interesting anyway. It was a really sad and difficult upbringing for Katherine. Her father would rape and abuse her mother multiple times a day. And in turn, her mother would then share really explicit sexual details with her children. She would tell her daughters how much she hated sex and how much she hated men. And you can totally be with her on that one if that's the sort of abuse that you're enduring all the time. So it wasn't a very pleasant upbringing for Katherine and her siblings. Later on, Katherine would say that she herself was abused as a child, but she claims that it was never by her father. And that was questionable, but that's what Katherine said. It was said that Katherine was a pleasant girl, but that she would fly into these like crazy murderous like rages over just really tiny things. And at school, her classmates said that she was a bully and she would stand over small children and just generally not be very nice. She got herself into some trouble. So she assaulted a child at school, a boy, and then she herself received some like wounds and stuff from a teacher, but the teacher was acting in self-defense. So she'd just gone crazy and this teacher had acted in self-defense, and which had then in turn hurt Katherine. But it sounds like when she was in one of these like rages, she was off the handle. And interestingly, completely on the other side of it, when she wasn't having these crazy rages, she was really well behaved, really pleasant. So she was a real Jekyll and Hyde, this one. Katherine left school when she was 15 and she had not learnt to read, she had not learnt to write, so her schooling experience just sounds like it was just a bit of a mess and very up and down with her behaviour and erratic responses to things that happened around her. She then got a job in a clothing factory as a clothing cutter. 12 months later, Katherine got what she described as, quote, her dream job at an abattoir where she was promoted to boning, you heard me right, and given her own set of butcher's knives. Now these knives, she would put them above her bed wherever she lived so that they, quote, would be handy if she ever needed them. Oh, Katherine. She's a case. In 1973, Katherine meets David Kellett. Now, Katherine is domineering and dominating of this David Kellett from the start. She's got him under her thumb completely. It's kind of scary, actually. He's described as hard drinking, so absolute pisshead. In 1974, she tells him that they're going to get married. And they arrive at their wedding ceremony on a bicycle, no, motorbike. And when they arrived at their wedding, Katherine's mother had some strong advice for David. She said to David, "You better watch this one or she will effing kill you." Strong advice. Watch her with your eyes all the time, where is she? Oh, and he turned up completely drunk to his wedding. Although I'm not one to judge, because so did I at mine. On their wedding night, bearing in mind he just got this advice from mum in the morning, her mum, watch it, you know, blah, blah, blah. She tried to strangle him to death on their wedding night. Oh, my, I mean, it's too late then, isn't it? Done it, married. But she tried to strangle him. She says it's because he fell asleep after only making love to her 3 times. Katherine, like, what? Okay, so then it does get, like, dark. The marriage was just really violent, and Katherine, she just behaved incredibly badly towards David. On one occasion, he came home late from a darts tournament because his group or his team had won. Don't know how darts works. Team, group. They had won, and so he was late home, and she smacked him round the back of his head with a frying pan, and it really badly fractured his skull, and he feared so much for his life, excuse me, that he ran to like a neighbour's house. She had also burnt all of his clothes and his shoes and then smacked him around the head. And she was heavily pregnant at the time as well. Now, I know heavily pregnant women can be like a bit potty, but that is taking the biscuit. I just cried for like a month. Obviously, the police were called because he went to a neighbour, and as soon as the police were involved, she was then switcheroo, perfect like wife, really like, oh, sorry. And she really convinced him to like don't like make any charges against me. I love you so much. She could switch it. She could be really pleasant and really nice, or murderous and crazy. So she switched on her pleasant and nice, and it all just like fizzled out into nothing. In 1976, Katherine gave birth to her first daughter, Melissa. And it's just awfully sad because she suffered with postnatal depression. And days after she gave birth to Melissa, David left her for another woman and moved to Queensland. And that must have just been really difficult for her to deal with, but you can't really blame him because her behaviour was just so erratic, and she basically had nearly killed him as well with the old frying pan incident. So yeah, he got out of there and he left her. She then has Melissa, the baby, to take care of, and not long after she'd had Melissa, she was seen walking down the road with the pram, and she was like really violently throwing the pram from side to side with the baby in it. So she was then admitted to hospital. She was admitted to St Elmo's Hospital, and that is where she was then diagnosed with postnatal depression. So she was there to recover. This is when it gets spicy. It like literally, when I read this, my palms like sweat, like dripping sweat, makes me feel uncomfortable. So she's released after a few weeks from St Elmo's Hospital, apparently recovered from her postnatal depression. Few weeks, doubt it. So she then takes baby Melissa and she puts this baby onto the train tracks and leaves. And she then steals an axe and she heads into town and she threatens to kill like a few people, and she's just gone crazy. There's this guy, thank the Lord, called Old Ted. That's what he was known as. And he was like foraging around the rail tracks and things like that. Thank God. And he rescued baby Melissa minutes before a train came. Oh, you know, when like sometimes things, you're just like, oh my God, because that's awful. And yeah, so thank God for Old Ted, basically. Knight was then arrested. Sorry, I'm aware I keep calling her Katherine Knight, Katherine Knight. I like to pick one, but I can't decide today. So you know who I'm talking about. It's Katherine Knight or Katherine or Knight or Katherine or Knight. Anywho, so she was arrested, obviously. She's like waving an axe around and she's tried to have her baby run over by a train. She's taken to Elmo Hospital again, St Elmo Hospital again. Hard to take the name of that hospital seriously. Just Sesame Street. And you tell me how to get... Anyway, she's taken back to St Elmo's Hospital. And apparently, after a day of being there, she's fully recovered and she signs herself out. So she then, something moved outside. It's a leaf. Happens in autumn. Oh golly, this one just keeps on going. So a few days after this, oh, it's giving me a headache. She then takes one of her knives and she slashes the face of a woman and tells her to drive her to Queensland to find David. So this woman does so, and then she escapes when they get to a gas station. So when they get there, she escapes, but Katherine then takes a young boy hostage with the knife. Oh God, just awful. So the police arrive and they manage to disarm her with brooms, and they manage to get her into their custody. And the boy is okay. Like, so scary though. Can you imagine that? So she is then arrested. She is then also taken to a psychiatric hospital at this point. When are they going to just keep her there? She tells the nurses at this psychiatric hospital that she intended to kill the mechanic at the gas station. That's why they'd stopped there. She was going to kill him because he had fixed David's car so that he could go to Queensland. So she was cross with the mechanic. So she was going to kill him. Then she wanted to go to Queensland and she wanted to kill her husband and his mother. And like, okay. So the police, they go and inform David of all of these things going on, the situation. And David and his mother, who she's just said she's going to try and kill, they move back to Aberdeen to take care of Katherine. That's either completely crazy or just really nice, and I can't decide. Although let's remember that the baby is involved, so Melissa, that's his daughter. So that might have been a factor in all of this, probably was. Just call me Detective Safe. They all move to Brisbane. Brisbane? Yeah, that's how you say it, I think. And she obtains a job at a meatworks. Dream job, remember, choppity chop. She obtains a job there at the meatworks in Brisbane. So she's now living with David, the mum, his mum, her baby Melissa. 1980, they have another baby, Natasha. In 1984, Katherine leaves David. First of all, she moves in with her parents, and then she moves out and lives alone. She's working, and then she suffers a back injury. So she then claims, I don't know how it works in Australia, but like disability benefits and things. And then like they housed her somewhere similar to here. So she claimed disability benefits, and then they housed her in a flat or apartment. In 1986, Katherine meets another David, popular name today, David Saunders. And quite quickly they start a relationship and he moves in with her. But he keeps, but he keeps his place in Scone. That is probably not how you say that. Scone, one of those I'm imagining. Scone. Who loves a scone as well? Now that I've said it a few times, I don't know how I say it. Scone, scone, with thick cream and jam. And a cup of tea. Cannot wait to go and sit in a tea room and do that. COVID. I just checked, and in Australia they're called apartments too. Here in the UK we call them flats. But yeah, apartment. So he keeps his apartment in Scone and moves in with her and her two daughters. But Katherine, often gets like jealous of his behaviour. What's he doing? Who's he seeing? She's really like not keen, and quite often she would kick him out. He'd go back to his apartment and stay there for a bit, and then she'd be all like, oh, and then she'd go chasing after him and get him back. So it went on like that for a while. 1987. I'm seriously, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to sleep tonight. I'm going to have to like try and meditate my way through this. So in 1987, she slits the throat of David Saunders' 2-month-old puppy in front of him as a warning as to what would happen to him if he ever had an affair. And then she smashed him around the head with a frying pan, knocked him unconscious. Oh. It's like, why was she ever let out of a psychiatric hospital? I don't get it. 1988, she gives birth to a third daughter, Sarah. And this encourages David Saunders, to put a deposit down on a house, having a baby, buy a house together. What are you doing, you crazy man? Run for the hills. So they do that. And then in 1989, she gets some workers' compensation from the old back injury, do you remember? And she pays the house off. And she decorates that house from floor to ceiling in animal skins, things like this, and traps, rusty old traps, leather jackets, old boots, pitchforks, everywhere. It said that there was not a space anywhere that didn't have something going on in it. Feel like she needed to learn the old tidy house, tidy mind thing. After an argument one day, she hit Saunders. I'm not laughing, it's not funny, it's crazy. She hit Saunders in the face with an iron and then stabbed him in the stomach with a pair of scissors. What? He then goes back to his apartment in Scone, and you're thinking, yeah, he never comes back. No, he does. He does come back. He comes back, and when he comes back, he finds that all of his clothes have been cut and shredded up and all of this. You won't believe this, right? He goes into hiding. Good man. Best choice you've ever made. Best choice you ever made. Goes into hiding. Knight, Katherine, she tries to find him, obviously, and literally no one will tell her where he is. Well done, right? And then he does eventually come back because he's got Sarah, his daughter, and he wants to see her. And when he comes back, Katherine tells the police that she's frightened of him and she's so afraid of him and he's awful and he's done horrible things to her. And they issue her an apprehended violence order against him. This one's doing my head in. Actually is doing my head. Move forward now. 1990, Katherine becomes pregnant by a 43-year-old ex-abattoir co-worker, John Chillingworth. They are in a relationship for about 3 years. She gives birth to a son, Eric, but she's been having an affair for a long time with a man called John Price. This comes out, and that's the end of her relationship with John Chillingworth. My apologies. John Price, Pricey, as he's known. Are we all keeping up? I'm not sure. There's a lot of men. There's a lot of madness, to be honest. Okay, so she's now with John Pricey. No, John Price. He's called Pricey. I will try not to confuse you any longer. Apologies. Pricey was a father of 3. His youngest child, a daughter, lived and remained with his ex-wife, who he'd broken up with in 1988. And his eldest 2 children live with him. He was described as a terrific bloke. I think more gin might be needed today. And he was aware of Knight's violent tendencies when he moved in with her. And he moved in with her in 1995. And his children liked her. So all seemed rosy at first. In 1998, they had a row. It was bound to happen. So they had a row, and in retaliation, Katherine video recorded all of the items that Pricey had stolen from work, and she sent the tape to his boss. Whoa, spiteful. Even though the items that he stole were out of date medical kits and stuff that he'd got out of the rubbish, he was fired from his job, and he'd had that job for 17 years. I know she's done worse, but it's just really. So yeah, so he got fired and then he kicked her out. They took some time apart, and then Price took her back, and this is when the arguments and the violence and things just really kicked off in their relationship. It went to another level. And a lot of Price's friends, like, he just lost all of his friends because they were like, we don't want to be around you if you're still with her. Like, it's just crazy and toxic. So he lost like a lot of friends by choosing to stay with Katherine. He also refused for her to live with him. He was also making quite a lot of money at the time as well. So he was well off, and he had his own kids and stuff like that. And he was just like, no, you can't live with me now. We can be together, but you can't live with me. That didn't last very long. February 2000, she's there, and the arguments are thick and fast, and they're getting violent. And then they have an argument, and she stabs him in the chest. This time, he kicks her out. He's like, no. And he files for a restraining order against her in court. He then was at work, and he spoke to his co-workers, and he said, if I don't come in tomorrow, it's because she's killed me. And his co-workers begged him not to go back to his house, that she was there. And he just said that he couldn't. He said if he didn't, that she would kill his children. And that is just such a, I mean, yeah, you'd go home, wouldn't you? So he returns home. And when he returns home, he finds that she's there, but she's not herself, and that she sent the children away for a sleepover. That's when I'd run. That's when I would run. Your kids aren't there. Run. Whoa. I mean, she's already stabbed this guy in the chest. He goes next door to his neighbour's house. Well done. And he spends the evening there with his neighbours, and he goes back to his house at 11 p.m. To go to bed. And Katherine isn't there. 6 a.m. the next morning, Price's neighbours, they're concerned because his car, is still there and he's not gone to work. We know where this is going, don't we? The neighbours tried to hammer on the front door, tried to get into the house. They were really concerned. They wanted to wake him up. They were like, come on, blah, blah, blah. And then at 8 a.m, the police arrive and they force their way into the property. They find Katherine completely out of it. She's taken loads of pills. She's like comatose. She's like completely gone. And she had stabbed poor David to death. He woke up. The blood evidence pointed to the fact that he'd woke up, he turned on the light, he got up and he tried to leave, and he made it outside, but then he either came back in or was dragged back in, and then he bled to death. The autopsy showed that he'd been stabbed 37 times in the front and in the back, with a lot of the wounds going into vital organs. Brace yourselves. A few hours after he died, Knight went to an ATM and she withdrew £1,000. She came back. She skinned David and hung his skin from hooks. She then decapitated him and cooked parts of his body and served them up with vegetables: baked potato, pumpkin, zucchini, cabbage, yellow squash and gravy. She laid the table with 2 table settings, one for each of his children, and put a name card there at the table for them. She was basically going to serve his children parts of him for their dinner. Another meal was like thrown out the back, and they don't know why. Like, it was just completely disregarded. Like, they think maybe she tried to eat it herself and couldn't. Excuse me, I think I spat then. And disregarded it, but still. They found Price's head in a pot with vegetables on the stove. She then positioned Price's body, skinned body, and left a note saying that she'd like got him back for raping her children and things, but all of the allegations that she made in this note were like discredited. Knight claimed that she has no memory of the incident, and that she was like not with it, and she had literally no memory. She did plead guilty, but there was no reason given as to why she did, because she maintained that she couldn't remember the crime. And her lawyers asked for her not to be present in the room when some of the details of the case were being read out, because it was so graphic, and so some of the jurors, it was really difficult. And that was discounted. They were like, no, she can be in the room. And when they described the skinning and the decapitation, she went hysterical and had to be sedated. On the 8th of November, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. She appealed this and said that that was too strong for what she'd done, and that was denied. Thank you. Actually, just awful. What an awful one. Yeah, I'm going to have to meditate the hell out of today to get through. But yeah, I mean, it feels like so. It feels like in so many places, it's like, should we? She's crazy. Shall we stop letting her out? Easier said than done. I don't know. I don't know what it's like in Australia, to be fair and to be honest. But I do know that lots of people with severe mental health problems don't get the support they need wherever they live. And that's crazy and sad and unfair. Bad one. Now I want to say, like, enjoy the rest of your day, but I don't even think I'm going to. For today's gin, I have gone with Rock Rose, which I love, and I love the bottle. Like I said, it is like a clay. I've said this before, sorry, if you haven't watched that one. And you can get refills so that you can just refill this beautiful bottle, and it is absolutely delicious. And I used the good old Fever Tree Tonic's Indian tonic water, and it was delightful. Sorry if I've completely dampened your mood today with that story of just non-stop violence and craziness. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Sin and Tonic, and I really hope that it hasn't put you off and that you will join me again next week for another true crime story and a glass of gin. Bye!